So great talk so far. I hope you have some attention left before the coffee break starts. So today I want to talk about an application of process mining in web analytics and with a project where we mapped out the customer journey. So the company I did this for is Online Dialogue. I work there as a data scientist, and we are a small consultancy firm that specializes in CRO, which stands for conversion rate optimization, which basically means how can we improve websites, and conversion can be anything, and I'll come back to that later. And how we do that is that we combine data, insights, together with psychology knowledge that we have, and then we create hypotheses on how we can improve, and we test those ideas. And by the way, for those who are wondering where I am in this picture, who cannot find me, I just joined the company a couple of weeks ago, so I'm looking forward to our next trip so I can finally be in the company picture as well. So the general question we are trying to answer as a company, and a lot of clients come to us with this question: how can we optimize our website? And usually this means how can we increase the number of purchases made on our website? And one approach you normally take is we create a funnel. And a funnel is basically a predefined set of steps, basically a customer journey that we expect customers to take. And this is an example where we see, for example, customers coming from the home page and eventually landing on a purchase. So in this case, we expect customers to take this path and then eventually land on the conversion we want them to take, and that's, in this case, a purchase. But for this project, we had a kind of unusual question because the main KPI was not purchase. We had to look at different KPIs for this client because they want to know, for example, how many customers did read their blogs, or how many customers use their advice guides that they have on their website, and also how many customers do actually make store appointments to offline stores from the website. So the problem here was for us that we didn't know where those points fit in the customer journey that we usually map out, because those were kind of unusual touch points. So luckily, we have something like process mining that we can use to identify real customer behavior, and then we can answer those questions. So today I want to talk about this project in more detail, and I will talk about it in three sections. First, I will tell you which data we used and how we prepared that. Then the actual fun part, the process mining, and I'll show some maps we made. And then finally the results and how we actually use those insights to improve and optimize the website. But first, let's start with the data. So in web analytics, you can measure all kinds of things on a web page. So for example, let's say this web page, then you can measure things like page views, so which pages are actually viewed. You can measure things like clicks on certain buttons and scroll levels, all things imaginable. And this looks something in table form like this. So you have the user ID, timestamp, what type of event it is. So for example, a page view, and some more details on which page actually is viewed. Here are some other examples, but in reality, the data looked something like this. And to give you a broad idea, we collected about 4 weeks of data on this website, and this was about 3 million rows of events. And for process mining, we had to, of course, get those three values, so the case ID, timestamp, and activity. So in the case ID, in this case of web analytics, we have something that's called the user pseudo ID, which is actually a unique identifier for each user, but it is anonymized, so we cannot track it to individual persons, so we don't know demographics or age, but we can track a user over a session and over different pages. Also good to mention here is when you don't accept the web analytics cookies, you won't be visible in the data, but we still have enough data left for those customers that actually accept those cookies. And luckily for us, this ID does not need any processing, so we could just use it directly from the data source itself. Then for the timestamp, we had to do some processing because the timestamp is usually measured in a format that's called a Unix timestamp. It's a timestamp in microseconds since a certain date and time. So we used Python, and I'll actually show some code for those interested to convert this timestamp to a more readable format. So we loaded the data into a data frame, and then we convert the timestamp by dividing the number of microseconds by a million to get actual seconds, and then use the datetime function to actually translate this number of seconds to a readable date. And then we got something that we can read as humans, and also process mining tools can work with. And finally, for the activity, we had a couple of options. We have the events. So those are generally quite high-level descriptions, so page views, purchases, clicks. This is usable, but not very much because it's too high level. So we want to add more detail, and then we have, luckily we have the page type for this. And the page type gives more detail on what pages are viewed. But for some cases, the page type was not, had no values. So in those cases, we basically wanted to fill them with the event names. So we needed a combination of page types and events. And with Python, we could easily do it. So if the event name was the page view, we would just use the page type. In all other cases, we would just use the event name. And this gave us the data we needed. So one last step is just select the relevant columns, and then we were ready to go. And this data we used in Disco, the process mining tool we used. And that's what I want to talk about next. So this was the first map we made. And right away, we saw a couple of things. First, we saw a lot of duplicate activities. For example, two things that basically had the same function in the process, but were separate events because of naming. So we had to combine those. And other things like we also saw irrelevant activities. In this case, for example, we saw visits to order pages which could only be reached through certain emails on checking order statuses. It was not actually part of the website, so we decided to exclude those. I won't bore you with all the things we saw, but basically the point I want to make here that we had to go back and forth between data processing and actually process mining a lot of times. And luckily with Python, it's pretty easy also. The previous speaker also mentioned it, that if you use Python or a similar tool, then you can really easily replicate the same process over and over again. But finally, we got our first process map. So this is the whole map of all the events we included. And just before I dive into the insights, I want to go back to the beginning of the story where I showed the funnel. And it's actually a big difference. So this was kind of an eye-opener for us also, because we usually make those funnels, but the reality is much more complex. So the question is, shouldn't we use it more often? And should we not trust those funnels as much as we do? But now back to this map. Two things I want to highlight, just general, what were interesting things we found. For example, a lot of direct traffic straight to the product detail page. So not to the home page, as you might expect, but to the detail page, which is a page where just one product is shown with some product information, where the main action you want to use to take is to buy the product. And this is explainable because a lot of ad traffic is actually pointing to the product detail pages. But it's good to know because it's kind of the landing point for a lot of visitors. So if that page is not working well, then you might lose a lot of customers over there. Another thing is that we also saw similarities with the funnel, luckily. We saw the checkout process once customers were actually visiting the cart and trying to buy the products. Those steps were very linear. So from there on, the funnel was pretty much the same as we expected it to be. So we see a combination of unexpected entries, but also more linear processes. Now back to the original question we were trying to answer, because now we have the maps to answer those questions. Where do those different touch points fit into the customer journey? And to make it a bit more concrete, I want to highlight one example, and that's of the store page. And the store detail page looked something like this. This is a page of a offline store. So this is a company that sells products online, but also offline. And for them, it's very lucrative to get people to their stores because usually the conversion rate is a lot higher, and there are also more upsell values in the stores. So this is an example of a store page where you have information like opening hours, for example. And there are two main actions we want customers to take here. The first is they can ask for directions to navigate to the store. And secondly, they can make appointments from this page, and then it's very likely that they will actually visit the store. So those are the goals for this page. And then with process mining, we started asking, the first question we ask ourselves, basically 2 questions. How do customers reach this page, and where do they go after they reach this page? That's the question we started with. And to do that, we filtered our map on all the journeys that had at least one, all the cases that had at least one visit to the product detail page. And then we got a map that looked like this. And 3 insights from this map that I want to share with you. First, similar to the product detail page, we also see a high number of direct traffic to the store page. And we also believe this has similar explanations. For example, people Googling the company name and the city they live in, and then they get directed to this page from Google. But also a high exit rate. So people are entering this page, but not taking actions we want them to take, and they are leaving it directly. So that's already combination of those 2 gives us an indication that there might be a lot of optimization possible there. And then finally, we also see product-related actions in the same flow. So store and product searches are not separate. They are both within the same customer journey. So this might also be an interesting point if we want to combine those more and so store information on product pages, for example. The first 2 points gave us another idea that maybe this map was a bit skewed because we had a lot of direct traffic, so we decided to make another map that excluded this traffic. We did this by filtering basically on excluding all the cases that started on the store detail page. And then we got this map. What we see here is that also a lot of product-related activities where this flow starts. So people search for products, and eventually they maybe decide they want to see it in store themselves, and then they visit the store pages. But also, there's a very small percentage that actually use those store-related actions, like navigating and making appointments. It's less than 5%, and that's actually what we want to improve. So those were just a couple of insights we got from the store. We did this with all the other KPIs. We asked more questions, and eventually we ended up making a lot of process maps, and from all those maps getting insights and ideas on how we can improve this website for those KPIs. So that was the process mining part, and then next we had to present those insights to the stakeholders, and there I will talk about in this section. Small anecdote, the first time we showed this process map to the stakeholders, we got a reaction something like this, very confused. They saw a lot of lines, a lot of points, never seen a process map before. So that's a lesson we learned. We have to simplify the process maps. And that we turned to PowerPoint, the lazy method, as mentioned before, to visualize the results. So basically that's what we did. We looked at the process maps, looked at, from our experience, to the data and saw where possible opportunities for improvements were. And next is, of course, the question, how do we get from this advice to actually concrete improvements? Well, luckily there's something called A/B testing, which we actually use a lot. To explain what this is, let's take the store page as an example. The store page, we call this the A variant in this case, or a control, which is the page as is right now. So this was a store page. And then using the data, we might have an hypothesis like, we think we can increase the number of actions taken here by adding a big widget to Google Maps. And we hope that we make it more easy for people to get the directions, and then more people will take store-related actions. So this is an hypothesis, but we don't know in practice if this works or not. So that's why we use A/B testing, because what happens with A/B testing is that for fixed periods of time, we split all our traffic 50% to the A variant and the other half to the B variant. And then after the experiment length, we look at the main KPI we want to improve on. For example, in this case, the number of times customers ask for directions from this page, and we see if it actually significantly improves or not. And if it does, then we can implement the change, and then we have, in small increments, improved the website. So this is just one hypothetical example. Usually what we do is we create from this kind of data a lot of ideas that how we can improve, all ideas we eventually are wanting to test, of course. And unfortunately, for this project, I don't have results yet on the A/B tests, but for this company, we did over 200 tests over the last years on purchases mostly, so on conversion rates online. And of those 200 tests, around 20% of the tests is actually an improvement. So this gives the importance of, and it's actually pretty industry standard, so it's not that we are generating bad ideas, but in general, ideas are not always an improvement. Most of the time, they are just the same as the current situation. So that's why validation is very important, because to make sure that you reduce the risk of making bad decisions. So those were the results. I wanted to finish with a couple of takeaways from this process. The first is take time to prepare your data. So actually, I believe more than half of the time we use for this project, we actually were working on preparing the data and collecting it and adjusting it. So know that you have to take time for that. Make fast iterations possible. It was mentioned before, but you might want to repeat this process a couple of months later to see if anything has changed after you've made some improvements. Then it's easier if you can just put in new data and get exactly the same map as you had before. Third one is define clear questions. I think process maps can be very overwhelming at first. So if you don't know what you're looking at, then it can be very hard to find insights. But if you have a clear question, then you can look at the map to answer that question. Also, simplify those maps. Again, they are very overwhelming, so if people are not familiar with them, just focus on the key insights and show those. And lastly is always validate your idea. So this could be via A/B testing, but it could also be with a before-after analysis. But make sure that you actually test if an idea you have based on process mining is actually working in the way you intended to do. So that was it for today. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the other talks.
Do you have questions for Alex? Okay, so maybe I start with one question. You mentioned at the very beginning, that's the specialization of the company, usually the funnel conversion rate optimization, and that the team there has a background also in psychology, I think. So I'm curious, of course, I think it's particularly relevant in this scenario because you can't speak with the people visiting the website, right? So you have to kind of make assumptions like how people work, how people tick. But can you go into a little bit more detail and give some examples, like how is psychology knowledge used for this type of customer journey analysis?
Yeah, so indeed from the data side, we see friction or bottlenecks in the process. And then, for example, with the store page, then we let a psychologist look at the page and see where there are maybe points of friction from a behavioral point of view. So, for example, the directions button was a bit hidden, not very clear. So you could maybe make that more, that's a pretty obvious example, but make it more bigger or clearer. Also, it was already done on this page, but you saw, for example, the benefits of visiting a store. So you saw above the appointment button, which is usually, it's called a USP, so unique selling points, or which gives people trust in their decision to actually make an appointment, which helps. Usually we see that increases actions taken.
Okay, so to convince them, to give them some reasons. Okay, interesting. Yes, we have a question there.
Sure.
Okay.
You mentioned that, actually I'll start. The data that you used for this, you said there's a lot of crossover with some of what analytics platforms can do. Where did you get the data from? Was that from within the commerce platform itself, or did you bring it in from an analytics platform and then?
It's from an analytics platform, in this case, Google Analytics. And it's we collect the data via BigQuery, which is basically a SQL database where you can query the data and just get the data we need.
Right.
I've got a question about the unique key you're using. Is it for every time a person visits the site, there's a new key, or does the key stay with the customer?
Good question. The key, in principle, it stays with the customer. But once you delete cookies or maybe from another device, then it can be reset. And in this case, we could use it because usually on this website, there are not many returning customers. So most customers visit the website in one session and then they made a purchase or not, but they don't return often.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a short question related to the first question of Anne. I was just wondering, do you also have clients who want the other way around, to find it to make it more difficult to find address or customer service or?
Might be, but we haven't had those questions yet. But it might be, of course, possible. So
Okay.
of course, it's possible.
Okay, thank you.
First off, very nice presentation.
Thank you.
And I had a question. You showed in your process map a small cluster, which I guess was part of the purchase step in your funnel. Have you tried mapping other parts of your process map to this funnel? And would this maybe be valuable in CRO in general?
I don't think I get you. Could you please maybe rephrase it a bit?
So if you had your process map, there was
Yeah.
a small part of it, of events, which you said corresponded to the purchase step in your
Yeah.
funnel. Have you tried mapping other parts of the process map to the same steps in your funnel?
You mean like the homepage and the...
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we tried, but we actually didn't see it directly. So we saw a lot of steps in between. So as we saw before, for example, the homepage was not the first entry point for a lot of customers. So people navigate back and forth in reality. So we tried to find it, but we didn't actually see it always as clear as the example I showed.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
I have a question. Since the dawn of online websites, these page analytics tools have been around, and there are many platforms. So I'm trying to decipher what's the unique selling point of applying process mining over, let's say, the other traditional tools. I'm asking for your opinion.
I think the traditional methods are a great start, and a lot of insights can be gained from them. But in case you want to actually see the actual behavior of customers on websites, then it might be helpful to actually use process maps, because then you can test if the expectations you have actually correspond with the reality. And you might also see things that are, for example, bottlenecks or very strange spots that can help you improve the website. But of course, it's harder to actually use those tools like process mining. I think that's the benefit of those other tools. They are pretty more standard to use and easily usable.
Thank you for your nice presentation. Just in your title, you mentioned this unusual customer. I mean, based on your analysis, how you can define these unusual ones?
What you mean? What defines unusual?
Yeah, unusual customers. I mean, how did you find it in your analysis?
The unusual part was more related to the KPIs we were trying to look at. So usually we look at purchases KPI. Like I think 90% of the questions we get is, how can we improve the number of purchases made? This was unusual in the case that we wanted to focus on things like store appointments, which were not normally the KPIs we try to optimize for.
Okay. Thank you.
And you also mentioned you were working with the same customer before on other questions? Or
Yeah, so this is a longer customer of ours. We usually also focuses on purchases and still does. So that was a kind of side project for that customer.
More questions for Alex? No? So then I would say let's go into the break. Thanks Alex again.